Okay, welcome, and thank you for joining us. This is the NAAS Roundtable. My name is Bill Neri, and I am proud to be the project manager of the National Alliance for Audition Support, or NAAS, as we sometimes call it for short. NAAS is the unprecedented national initiative to increase diversity in American orchestras. Before I begin, I'd like to just remind everyone in the audience, please engage with us using the Q&A chat function, which you'll see in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. We have plenty of time at the end of the session to address any questions, but feel free to bring them up and type them in as you think of them. I have no doubt that we're going to spark some really great conversation with everyone's input. And before I share more about what NAAS has accomplished over the years, I'd just like to introduce everyone on my panel. Each member here on this panel is representing an integral component of NAAS. Francesca McNeeley is a cellist and alumna of NAAS programming based out of Boston, Massachusetts, and she was recently appointed to the NAAS Artist Council along with two other active musicians on the audition circuit. Meredith Snow is a violist with the Los Angeles Philharmonic and chairperson of the International Conference of Symphony and Opera Musicians, also known as ICSOM. Meredith co-chaired the committee that is responsible for creating the document that is linked in the description below. And Kibra Yohannes is a program associate with the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. Mellon provided the $1.8 million seed grant to ignite our mission in 2018. Thank you to all three of you for coming in and joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Glad to be here.
Now I'm going to share my screen, and I'm just going to present a little bit about what NAAS has been up to over the years. As I said, NAAS is the unprecedented national initiative to increase diversity in American orchestras. It is an artist-centric initiative with the goal of supporting Black and Latinx orchestral musicians through financial support, audition training, and audition previews. NAAS was launched in 2018 with the generous support of the Mellon Foundation in partnership with the Sphinx organization, New World Symphony, and the League of American Orchestras. Additionally, the Alliance's partnership is augmented with the support of our NAAS Orchestra Partners. This year, we have 98 dues-paying orchestra partners, which is a generous increase from last year's 77 and our original 40. Each one of these orchestras not only contribute financially, but they also have a seat at the table to contribute their reactions and impressions on the makeup of American orchestras, and they pledge to support our goal of increasing diversity in American orchestras. We're incredibly grateful for all their contributions, and I'm excited to share the impact of this alliance and its partnerships. The close relationships that we have with these partners has provided the layout for a potentially industry-changing initiative. Linked to the description, like I said earlier, you'll see the recently announced NAAS Recommended Audition and Tenure Guidelines, and that is a detailed document listing recommended practices for the audition and tenure processes that we believe will bring the orchestra world into a future where stages reflect the communities they serve. We'll hear more about this important work later on when I speak with Meredith. NAAS is advised by and supported by groups of dedicated musicians, directors, and managers in the orchestra and higher education fields. These advisors come to us from organizations like the New York Philharmonic and San Francisco Symphony, Williamsburg Symphony and Midland Symphony, and many others. We're also advised by the leadership of the American Federation of Musicians, the International Conference of Symphony and Opera Musicians, and the Regional Orchestra Players Association. In total, we have almost 50 individuals that we constantly run our ideas by to make sure that we are maximizing our reach. NAAS, being an artist-driven initiative, is reliant on input and collaboration with experienced orchestral players. The NAAS Artist Council is a team of musicians who come from orchestras all over the country whose combined experience of performing in orchestras provide invaluable input for our project. Recently, in 2020, and its unanticipated and disordered impact on our field, the Alliance realized the need to hear directly from the artists that we serve, those that are now hungry for opportunities to grow and to learn in a space that has little to no audition or performance opportunities. We're happy to have added these three new members to the NAAS Artist Council, who you can see on the bottom right of the slide. And that's Francesca McNeeley, who's joining me today. Jonathan Colbert is a bassist based in Atlanta, Georgia. And Chaz Salazar is a flute player from Phoenix, Arizona. Financial support. Now, financial support is the main component for the support we provide our artists. The goal for this support is to help level the playing field and break down barriers for NAAS artists by directly supporting musicians with funds to pursue opportunities that would otherwise pose financial strains. We're proud to share that since our launch, we've awarded 327 grants totaling over $300,000 in support. 224 of these grants were audition grants. These awards are awarded to musicians prior to their travel to auditions around the country so that they could focus their energy and attention on the performance rather than attaching their outcome to a financial strain. Another element of our financial support is the instrument grant. Now, this is funding that is used to support repairs, maintenance, and equipment purchases. Since our launch in 2018, 64 awards totaling over $80,000 went to artists to give them the tools they need to thrive in orchestra. Now, the third type of grant we offer directly to our artists through financial support is the substitute musician grant. These grants are used to fund travel and lodging for NAAS musicians that are pursuing substitute opportunities with an orchestra. Sub-grants have been used to bring NAAS musicians to orchestras like Minnesota Orchestra and Pittsburgh Symphony and others that are also listed on the slide. It's not uncommon for a musician to be offered work with an orchestra that would require them to pay for a flight and a hotel, either from an audition that they did well in, they might have had a lesson with a principal player in the orchestra, or it might have resulted from a placement from the Sphinx Orchestra Partners audition, which is something we'll talk more about in a minute. No matter the size or the location of the orchestra, NAAS will consider all substitute grant requests that deliver high caliber artists of color to play with any U.S. orchestra. In addition to our financial support for musicians, we also provide support through audition training. The audition intensives, as we call them, are essentially audition boot camps, and they are inspired by our partners at the New World Symphony. We've held 5 of these intensives live in person in Miami at the New World Center in 2018 and 2019. And in 2020, we hosted 2 online audition intensives. And in total, we've trained 142 NAAS participants through our training programs. In our first 2 years, in 2018 and 2019, we trained 68 NAAS musicians. And during these 4-day intensives, they featured 1 blind mock audition, coachings with faculty whose names you can see on the screen, and performance psychology training sessions with Noah Kagayama, the esteemed performance psychologist behind The Bulletproof Musician. And then in 2020, a testament to the ability of reaching new audiences through online platforms, an idea that I'm sure resonates loudly with this virtual audience today, we were able to train 74 new artists that have never been able to do our live intensives in the past. With the flexibility and reach of a digital learning space, we were able to have 9 weeks of cumulative programming throughout the year of 2020 and connected almost 100 artists with nearly 24 faculty. The format for the online intensives doubled the number of mock auditions, where participants would have an entrance and an exit mock audition to give them an arc or an overview to assess their progress from their weeks of hard work. Weekly lessons, group classes, and master classes were all components of both the summer and the fall online intensives. Now, these next 2 slides I'll share will just give some added detail on the online intensives. In the summer of 2020, we had 6 weeks of programming in June and July, where over 60 artists were paired with the faculty that are listed on the screen. And then in the fall of 2020, the 3 weeks that preceded the Thanksgiving holiday, we had a condensed intensive where we had daily activities, the same kind of lessons, mock auditions, and master classes for our 40 participants in that intensive, and the faculty are also listed on the screen. Finally, our third focus point for support are the audition previews. Known best under the name SOPA, the Sphinx Orchestra Partners audition provides musicians of color with the unique opportunity to play an audition for a panel representing several orchestras who are there seeking to identify musicians for placement opportunities. Traditionally, SOPA brings 50 Black and Latinx orchestral musicians to Detroit during the annual Sphinx convening to play blind auditions on Detroit's Orchestra Hall, where dozens of orchestra representatives listen in real time on the other side of a screen. This year, our auditions are not only entirely remote, but they'll be paired with our inaugural Excerpt Competition. Realizing an oversight in our training programs, we decided to introduce cash prizes to SOPA so that our musicians can train their competition skill set. And competition is something that we think can only really be addressed in real competitive scenarios. The SOPA Excerpt Competition will be in February of this year, between February 18th and 22nd. The Excerpt Competition will be broken down into 2 rounds, where the first round will be adjudicated by a selected panel of judges and SOPA representatives from orchestras that have committed to participate. This process will be streamlined so that the representatives will only listen to musicians of their instrument. For example, if a concertmaster of an orchestra is assigned to attend, they will only listen to the SOPA violin submissions for that round, and so on. To best address the concerns of equity in the SOPA auditions, we're providing a high-quality microphone to every SOPA candidate that needs one. The prizes totaling over $15,000 include a $3,500 first prize and a $1,000 second prize for our 3 finalist categories. These second and final round submissions will be adjudicated against other advanced instruments from the same category. And the categories are strings, woodwinds, and brass and percussion. There will also be $250 cash prizes awarded to the most outstanding candidate from every instrument. That's 13 in total. And if there are any questions about SOPA, you can share them with me directly on the email address on the screen. That's bill@sphinxmusic.org. And the most important component of this overview of SOPA that I want to share is that all the orchestras that are participating in SOPA as listeners have committed to guaranteeing an offer of work as a substitute or extra musician for no less than 1 week to at least one SOPA candidate to perform with their orchestra at any point through the 21-22 season. Through this, there will be over 40 performance opportunities extended to musicians of color for the coming orchestra season. 48 orchestras have already made that commitment to participate in SOPA this year. These institutions listed here have made that, and I'm excited to see that impact. We've received over 100 applications for SOPA so far, and the 103 candidates for SOPA, we have 103 candidates for SOPA this year, and that's over double of what we can normally hear during a live event. Everybody is welcome and invited to attend our winter ceremony for SOPA, which will be held on February 22nd at 6 p.m. Eastern. A link for that will be made available on our website, auditionalliance.org. Now I'm happy, as I'm sure everybody else is, to reintroduce my panel and bring the conversation over to my guests. And I'll just bring everyone back. We have Francesca McNeeley, member of our Artist Council, Meredith Snow, chairperson from ICSOM, and Kibra Yohannes from the Mellon Foundation. Thank you, the 3 of you, for coming in today. I'm just going to ask you a few questions, and then we also have plenty of time for questions from the audience. Again, the Q&A function is a great way to engage with us. So maybe I'll start with you, Francesca. Can you tell us, as a pursuer of orchestra jobs and an active performer, can you just give us an overview of what 2020 was like for you and maybe some ways that NAAS has been able to step in and provide you with support?
Sure. Well, thank you again for having me here. It's really great to connect again with all these Sphinx folk, even though all the way over here in Boston this year. But yeah, so 2020, it's sort of funny to reflect on the fact that pretty much exactly this time last year, I was in Detroit for the first SOPA, or my first SOPA. And, it was a very intense weekend, lots of really great networking. But the feedback I got from the audition was also very intense, and it was a lot to process. I think there was 70-something people behind the screen that everybody had an opinion about what Beethoven 5 should sound like. So it was a lot of information to take in. And I remember feeling, on the one hand, really, it was a lot. It was a little intimidating, but I came back, I really just reflected on all of it, and I felt really inspired to get to work. I think I left SOPA with a better understanding of, I think, the types of things I needed to work on as an auditioner. So there was all my inspiration, and then March came around. And everything changed, as I know it did with everybody else, but it was, understatement of the year to say that it was rough to watch concerts just vanish for about a year and a half. Auditions I was planning on taking just canceled. And so it was hard to know what to do because I'd had all this energy and inspiration and excitement. And then I learned that I wasn't the greatest self-motivator is what I learned in all of that. That I think once there wasn't something to work towards, it was really hard to motivate myself to do the hard work I needed to. So the timing of the first NAAS online intensive was quite perfect, actually. I think, was it around, I don't know if it was in April that emails came out about it, but that was actually the first time I was able to get myself back in the practice room. So thank you guys for finding a way to reinvent what that was going to be. but I think also given the timing of, I think all the conversations we were having in our field about, representation and inclusion, and, on the one hand, NAAS was great for my playing because it gave me a chance to kind of get back into it and get serious again with the detail work on excerpts. But the conversations we were having about the field were also really important. And I think it was a great opportunity to reconnect with mentors and have those conversations. And actually kind of felt like Sphinx. It felt like another moment of just coming together and everybody looking inward to try to come up with these, sort of solutions that or solutions to the problems that we're seeing. So anyways, the timing of that I think was really great and really cathartic for me. As I guess the year went on, I was really excited to get to join the Artist Council because it gave me a chance to sort of join the conversation in a different way than I'd been involved in before, and to be involved in some of the programming behind the NAAS programs and projects and stuff. And I guess on top of that, as later in the year, I was also really grateful to receive a grant from NAAS to work with a mentor from the New York Phil, who's been really wonderful. And I knew that I wanted to take advantage of all this sudden free time to work on some of these excerpts so that I'd feel more ready when they do auditions come back again. But I think I needed the external motivation to make that happen. Well, I definitely did. So I'm very grateful that NAAS was able to provide that for me. So I think like a lot of other musicians, I think we're kind of anxious to see when auditions will happen again, but I definitely feel much more encouraged about the place that I've gotten to in my playing, and that sort of in spite of all the disasters that came out of 2020, I do feel like it wound up being quite a year of growth for me, and I attribute a lot of that to the resources NAAS was able to provide. So
it's so great to hear. Yeah, and I was thinking the same thing, that I was just remembering that we announced our live intensives at last year's Roundtable, that we were going to have an intensive in Miami in May, and like everything had to be reimagined and we changed. And I was just really glad that we were able to still cultivate that familia feeling, even though it was online, and to maintain that throughout the year. So it's been really great that we were able to do that. And of course, so glad that we can have you as part of that, Francesca.
Thank you.
And I have a question now for Meredith to steer our conversation in a slightly different direction, but still in the same vein. Just to remind everybody that it should be linked below. I think you could just scroll down. There should be a hyperlink to the NAAS recommended audition and tenure guidelines document. I'm not expecting everybody to read through it in the next 30 seconds, but that is a resource that you can have and you can keep. This is something that Meredith worked really hard with us over the last few months as a co-chair for a committee that we formed to create this document. And so I just wanted to maybe bring that up, and Meredith, maybe you can give us an overview about the audition and tenure guidelines, and can you tell us what was the process like and what is the impact that you're hoping for?
So, the group that put together the guidelines was personnel managers from orchestras and conductors and executive managers and musicians and union representatives. So we pretty much covered the field in terms of who was having input on these recommendations. And from my perspective, I feel like what was most important for me was to be able to listen to Sphinx and to people on the circuit, and what were their experiences that they were having, that they were so, they felt shut out or couldn't find success. And so I hope that these guidelines reflect those desires as much as they do, the nuts and bolts of what an audition needs to be run like. And, I think that if I've learned one thing throughout this process and this past year, which I will empathize with Francesca, it's been hellish for everybody on both sides of the screen. I think that it's not enough for us, me, white folks, to sit back and say, well, the process is fair. We were doing the best we can. I think it is incumbent upon us to take on the heavy lift of what am I doing to help? How am I making this situation better? And I hope that all of us, everybody has learned through the trauma of this past year that everybody's got to pitch in, and everybody's got to self-examine and say, like, what do we look like when we come out of this? And what are we going to do? So that's kind of my perspective on what the guidelines hope to achieve. And I think it's just incumbent upon us to as institutions, as each orchestra, to discuss within ourselves, what can we do? How can we change this? How can we make it better? So I don't know if that's like the kind of detail you were looking for, Bill. I mean, I can talk about the nuts and bolts, the, you know, keeping screens from start to finish and not culling resumes. And I should have the things in front of me to be able to talk about them specifically, but just, there's nothing crazy in this document. It's all pretty like, these things make sense, and how can we be more accommodating and to work better together? So, and I think it also points out, which I think is really important for the institutions, the associations, the orchestras, the boards, the management, everybody that works there, that we all need to be more aware of our own biases, prejudices, and the trajectory that we have paved so far, which is not to say that we weren't trying to be fair in the past, but what's our success rate here?
Yeah, and I think you bring up a lot of great points with that. And I'll just mention a few that are come up to me, some of the shorter ones. Audition guideline number 1, consider granting all applicants a live audition and no screening of resumes. And point number 3, fully screened auditions from first round through last round. And you're right. I mean, I think that these are not asking for a whole lot. And there are some orchestras that have already adopted these. And the thing is that, you know, League of American Orchestras being one of our 3 alliance partners, we're covering the entire orchestra population here. And orchestras vary in terms of size and demographic and population, things like that, and location. Can you maybe give, and, you know, there's probably a lot of red tape and things along the lines of CBAs and collective bargaining agreements. You know, what are some ways that orchestras might be able to implement these guidelines within CBAs, knowing that they differ and vary so much?
Right. So, I mean, when you change the descriptions of how you conduct business, because the workplace is unionized, it needs to be in the collective bargaining agreement. But that doesn't mean that we're paralyzed at this moment in time. Again, I hear Francesca like, when is this going to start happening again? And I'm still out of a job right now, and it's going to be many months before we're back on stage because everything's shut down by Los Angeles County. So I would say that hopefully vaccinations going through and everything, that our industry will be up and running again by the fall. And so maybe we could be having auditions again sometime. I'm just guessing, don't hold me to this, but maybe sometime around this time next year, that we would have auditions scheduled. And we can change the process. We can talk within the orchestra with our management and musicians in terms of how are you going to change your audition process to be more equitable. That can be just a side letter. You can sit down anytime you want and hammer something like that out. And, you know, it can have a time limit on it, or it can be incorporated into the full CBA at a later time. Or so there's plenty of flexibility if the parties are willing. And I think that is the bottom line, that we have to be making this lift ourselves.
Right. And I totally agree. Do you think that, you know, timing is an interesting prospect right here with everything that's going on? Is this an opportune moment with no performances for a lot of orchestras, or is this a hard time for orchestras, knowing that there's, you know, some orchestras might have the defense or the argument or the pushback of, well, we're trying to just get ourselves on stage, let alone, you know, hiring new musicians. What would you say to that pushback?
I think there is opportunity for musicians and management to sit down and talk about stuff now, because there's nothing else. You know, you don't have to get that Thursday performance together. We have lots of time on our hands. And we're also trying to get into the practice room with no deadline. But I think because we have the time to focus on these things right now, because managements have the time to focus on programming coming up, like who are we going to program and who are we going to hire and how is this going to look going forward? There's time to do lots of work. It's just the actual implementation that's going to take a while, but you got to do the prep first anyway. So.
I hear you. Thanks. And I'm sure we'll come back to that topic in a second. I just want to also engage with Kibra here. Thank you, Kibra, for coming. You know, you coming from Mellon, and I love hearing the opening plenary and learning so much about what's going on at that macro level. And, for me, where I sit, and, Francesca and Meredith to a degree as well, we're dealing with sort of like the contractual stuff, the nitty gritty. Can you give us from your perspective, an overview or an idea of what orchestras offer in terms of systemic change and enduring change, and how that can be accomplished, and how orchestras might compare and differ from other cultural institutions?
Sure. Thank you, Bill. It's so great to be here. I feel like I'm part of the Sphinx family. I had my first conference last year and I was over the moon. And so like everyone else, was inwardly devastated that we wouldn't all be together. So I'm glad to see everyone today. And so, thank you. That's such a great question, Bill. I have to say, orchestras have built just an incredible infrastructure. And one that is unparalleled amongst other disciplines, right? There's artist stability in terms of the tenure process. There's strong labor protections, because of union representation, there's community amongst the artists, and audiences that largely consistently support the institutions, and an inherent framework for artistic rigor. So, that infrastructure and all the things that are built around it are pretty incredible when thinking about, what if any infrastructures exist for visual artists as individual artists, right? Or for dancers who might not be performing on Broadway or something like that. But the interesting thing is that, so when something is amiss, and amiss is being generous in terms of, no recourse to like the failure to become like inclusive or responsive, or, not having self-reflection around, organizational culture or bias, or, in actual instances where musicians of color are, have been harmed. The thing that is the opportunity in this situation is that orchestras have a structure, and you have a structure that is dedicated to and centers the artist. And so that's a really good starting point. And so, so when you think about at the end of the day, though, and if there are all of these structures that are in place that technically, when you take the humans out of it, are in protection of the artist, where does the work have to happen? And to Meredith's point, it's with the people, right? It's heart work, it's emotional work, it's with the staffing, with the leadership, and with community, and community being, those who are in the orchestra pit, as well as those who are in the audience, and who your neighbors are around that. And so, and that's what's exciting about NAAS, is because, well, certainly the focus is about, being able to give excellent musicians the opportunity to just show up, right? The real pedantic detail that nobody cares about except for Francesca. How do I get there? How do I pay for a hotel? How can I get assistance in terms of mentorship to like prepare myself for this? But NAAS is speaking, cohesively, right, to the entire structure, all of the players who are involved. So the fact that there are, ICSOM and AFM and the league are involved, as well as all the different layers, of an orchestra, is important, because otherwise that's not structural change. In the past, Mellon for many years supported fellowships, and that's just where the support ended. And sure, you can build a cadre of artists, but it doesn't mean anything if the hearts and minds of those in the orchestra, who are listening to them play, are actually open to the idea of, a more pluralistic representation, in amongst our the company. And so that kind of consensus building, and designing of shared values is what makes something change throughout the system, right? And so, and again, there's no comparison largely amongst other art forms. I'm sure other members of other fields would probably try to argue, but I feel confident in that. And so the thing that's really important in speaking about pandemic and what we do know, what we don't know, is that what we do know is that there's an interest for us to not go back to the same arts ecosystem that was in place a year ago, because it has completely collapsed you know, and imploded. And so, you know, if there's but with orchestra, what is offered, what you offer, if you can, you know, and I say this with respect, if you can overcome yourselves, right? And really address that and do the work, the hard work that Meredith was talking about, you potentially offer, you know, a framework for how artists can be, you know, have a universal and holistic creative life, right? And so, you know, and so I think that was the figure that in 2017, the arts economy is like $877 billion, like contributes to the GDP. And it's like, there's a moment now, right? For us to be able to step forward and say, this is how we want to redesign the arts ecosystem. And these are the things that we have an example, though it's flawed, right? But we do have an example of what it looks like to be able to provide the infrastructure for artists to have a long life in their careers, you know? And that's something that's very exciting. And in that is, you know, the opportunity to have questions and have conversation and say, how can we, where's there wiggle room with our CBA? How can we make this more humane, right? How can we be more pluralistic? And in this time be able to come up and actually hopefully even be able to lead. This is what recovery can look like in a way that our whole ecosystem as artists won't collapse. So that's what's most exciting, and where, you know, I think about orchestra and how you sit in the ecosystem.
Oh, thank you for that. And I'd probably add to that is recovery through unity, maybe. And you said something that stuck with me about shared values and cultures, and the first words of rebuttal that came to mind were like accountability and denial. And I wonder what steps orchestras can take, or what it looks like when, because they're you know, while they might all be centered around art and performers, they're also large institutions. And you know, sometimes there are some people who veer in one side of a spectrum and some that to another. And I think this is a really big reckoning year to have people align. But does it seem that we need 100% alignment and accountability in order to move in that direction, or do things like, you know, institutions like NAAS and Sphinx, can they you know, be the leader of that pack and orchestras just follow? Do you feel like there's a sense of, I don't know, an accountability or self-motivated leadership that has to happen? And this could be either for Kibra or Meredith.
Sure. I think, you know, you and I don't say this to sound Pollyanna, you really do need everybody at some point. You know, and I think it's, what are the broad strokes that people can understand and be willing to get behind. And so, you know, institutions, to your point, you need your board of directors to not, at best, not hinder the work, right? But when it's really, you want to see real transformation, right? And when there can be some real like pickup, you know, in the effort, is when there is alignment with the board and alignment with the leadership, you know, and then there's something that can trickle down and like a real addressing of the concerns, whether we might, you know, someone might decide that they are reasonable or not, within, you know, the body of the membership of musicians. All of that does have to happen. I think what is instrumental, though, to your point about can an organization like NAAS lead the way, I think by virtue of the way it's structured, right? That all of the players are at the table, you know, and even when there are tensions, you're still working through those tensions together. The change that will be like put into effect has a greater opportunity to actually stick, right? Because then there's somebody who's thinking about human resources and, okay, what are the things that we need to change in the operations manual to be more reflective of this? And then there's a music director who is thinking the same. And then there's the, you know, and then there's somebody who, you know, is representing the union who is thinking about what flexibility is there in the CBA? How can I guide them? How can I be supportive? So, you know, to your point, I think everybody at some point is going to have to be in agreement with some basic fundamentals about how can we be artists, be excellent, and be humane to one another, right? And then the nitty-gritty of how that gets worked out, Meredith, I'm sure, has more stories.
I'm going to push even a little farther. I think that it's absolutely necessary for every segment of the orchestra. You know, any orchestral institution, it's kind of a three-pronged power structure with the musicians and the board and the management. And ultimately, everybody has to be on board. You all have to be pulling in the same direction. And any collective bargaining agreement is the creation of the people in the institution. And so the people in the institution have to be on board with what they want to accomplish together. And it can absolutely be done. I mean, I think of an orchestra as a microcosm of the same problems that we experience as a society at large, as a country. You know, it's all the same. It's just in a smaller pool of people. And so I hope, again, after this year, that many minds have been changed and awareness has been brought and a desire to do something to change what this country looks like, what our orchestras look like.
Yeah.
That's where I'm headed. I'm good. I'm damned. I'm going to pull people behind me.
And it's interesting because, you know, some of it, again, what is such a great opportunity here is that some of it is really on paper, right? The ways in which the organizations are structured and ordered and how you can.
Yes, but we wrote those papers.
Exactly. No. I'm with you on that. And that's part of it, right? But the other part is the hard work that you're doing now in terms of, and what we're talking about, all of the, you know, the insecurity, the whistleblower words that people, you know, use, you know, for ideas of like concerns about cohesion and concerns about like artistic rigor. And it's like, let's get that off the table. What is the real concern? It's the real concern about there being enough in the fund when I retire. Is the real concern, like, you know, and really getting into like the nuts and bolts of what this means, you know, what bringing on, what showing real inclusivity, you know, and having, you know, people talk about stages that are reflective of your audiences, but also beyond that, making whatever are the additional values within orchestral music and its practice that are limiting even to women, you know, who've been playing, even limiting to the men who have been playing. There's some that are fundamental, I'm sure, I don't know this because I'm not a musician, but what are the limitations already that exist? Because those are going to be universally experienced if Francesca joins, you know, an orchestra, and even exacerbated further, right?
Yeah, it's not a zero-sum game.
No, I agree.
You can bring more people in, and
I know for a fact, yeah,
and it's not. I think if everybody's willing in the organization to change that priority, that there's room to do it, and it's not like the money's going to suddenly dry up because you've changed your priorities. I think just the opposite. I think, that it's going to expand the institution.
I agree.
But I think the point you bring up about, hiding behind the paperwork in a way, like the fear of, I think people do experience in orchestras, the fear that because we've been through a lot of financial upheaval, it's been difficult. And we have fought for decades to get things like tenure and, you know, pensions and health insurance and all that. And so there is a fear of like, how much can we change without losing what we have or without the bottom falling out? We need to have courage and we need to step up and say, this is an important priority. And it's not going to hurt, you know, it isn't, but people have to recognize that.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can all agree on that. I see there are a couple questions that have come in from the audience, and thank you for bringing in some questions, everybody. Question one that I see: for an orchestra that struggles to find diverse candidates to audition, there appears to be a lack of knowledge where to find these candidates. NAAS seems to be an answer. How can I best educate my orchestra about NAAS and the benefits? And I could just answer this question directly. For one, on the NAAS website, auditionalliance.org, or you can also, it's also an extension from the Sphinx website. There are a few resources. One, there's the Sphinx job postings page, which goes out to our entire Sphinx community. There's the NAAS musician database, which is a public-facing database of NAAS artists that have electively put their resumes and names on that listing, and also their city and state where they are. So if you want to shortlist people just in your area, you could reach out to them that way. And also reaching out just to me directly, and I can forward any audition posting ads to our entire community as well. So that's one thing. And educating the orchestra can also be done as, and I think it's something we've encouraged our orchestra partners, of which we have 98, to do. That we've had as when they sign up to be an orchestra partner, we ask them to please let them know what NAAS is up to, what we're doing, and there's a packet that's been sent out to all of orchestras in that letter that went out in the fall. And just signing up to be a NAAS orchestra partner is a great way to stay involved and to educate your orchestra about what you can do to attract diverse candidates. So that's my answer to that. And then question 2, could someone please address using recorded submissions prior to live auditions? I do not see this addressed in the guidelines, except perhaps where it recommends to consider granting all applicants a live audition, no screening of resumes. So Meredith, does the no screening of resumes answer the question of using recorded submissions prior?
No, I mean, orchestras have been, 2 decades prior through a whole attempt at using recorded submissions as a first round, and to varied success. I'm not sure that it's the best way to listen to people. I think probably the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra put in the best fix for not screening resumes by, again, dividing up the committees, several committees listening to first rounds rather than just one committee. So you could be doing first rounds over a couple of weeks. Every orchestra decides for themselves how they're gonna run the audition. And so I personally wouldn't want to be doing taped rounds. I don't know how, Francesca, you feel about that. Yeah, forget it. Every tape comes in sounding different, and it's as unnatural as the audition process is, the taped process is worse. So
yeah, no, and
yeah, go ahead.
Like a person, I mean, I understand why tape rounds seem like they would be a convenient option, I guess, for screening people, but I'm telling you, when you're not in school and if you don't already have a job, finding a space to get those things done is impossible. I mean, unless you have thousands of dollars to go to a recording studio. I mean, last time I had to make a tape, for some reason, every different day of the week, somebody in my neighborhood had to do their lawn, and I
could loan you my dog.
Right. So
but I mean, the problem on the other end is that you have 350 applications, and how are you going to listen fairly to 350 people in a day? You can't do it. And then, then they have to come back for the first. Yeah, so it's complicated, but it's different in every orchestra. It's different in every situation. They get a different number of applications. So I think it's kind of, boots on the ground sort of decision, but I wouldn't want to go back to tapes.
Great. Yeah, I think that's a good point. There's another question here. Have there been any particular models employed by orchestras for hiring and tenure that have demonstrated progress in terms of diverse candidate pools, hiring and/or inclusive environments for underrepresented musicians? Are there any anecdotal examples?
We do not have data. That is the biggest stumbling block. Like, it has not been collected. Who auditions? How often? How far do they make it in the process? Who gets hired? It is wildly anecdotal and not factual. And so it's really hard. You look again at the Met process, and other processes in the United States are fully screened, which doesn't solve the problems at the beginning where who gets actually to show up and play. But and maybe more people of color get hired. Certainly more women got hired. Starting in the 80s when we used screens all the way through. But I have to go back to the fact that we don't have data to answer that question. Part of this process that we're working on with NAAS moving forward is collecting that data.
Yeah, and I'll echo that a bit, that we have, at the same time when we convened this committee that Meredith is a co-chair on, we also created a committee to develop a way of accurately and fairly collecting data around the audition process. And that's something that is very close to completion, almost as complete as we had we just announced the guidelines document that we're referring to now. That was announced at the League's midwinter manager meeting just a week and a half ago or 2 weeks ago. And so this data collection committee, they've come up with essentially a voluntary self-identification form that musicians can fill out during the application process. And that's something that we're still navigating and working out the kinks to. And that's something that, we at the same time as, deciding that we need fair audition and tenure processes, we also recognize the need to have a fair way of collecting data around that. And that's something that I think is imminent. And I'm excited for that as well.
Yeah, and I don't mean to be coy. The final data point is that we are not integrated, and that needs to be fixed. But how we get there, what's the process, is still under construction.
Great. Let me see another question here. NAAS recommendation number 4 says 25% of pre-advanced should be Black and Brown. Are you expecting that members advance to finals makes the round a pre-advanced round as well? Now, I think the question is asking, are you expecting that members advance to finals make the round a pre-advanced round as well? So I think what we're trying to say with that point, Meredith, correct me if I'm wrong, is that if there is any pre-advancement to a final round, something that we've recognized as potentially unfair, that if there is anything like that, that there's at least 25% representation of musicians of color in that pool of pre-advancement. Do you have anything to add? Or Francesca, if you want to say something about that too.
I guess I think that it's really important to have the pool of, if you're going to hire to try to correct the numbers of people on stage of color, that you have to have enough people behind the screen to have a real chance, that because there is so much involved. There is so much chance involved in auditioning. It's just like your lucky number came up that day. I certainly feel that way about having gotten my job. It just worked, I played well and the people behind the screen liked it. So I think that the more people of color you have behind the screen, the better chances you have of hiring somebody. So I want to push back a little bit on the idea that pre-advancement somehow makes the chances better, because the people who listen to auditions listen to everybody. And if you play really well, then you're in the next round. I don't know if auditionees feel that, I guess they do feel that if they've, Francesca, you address this. How do you feel when you're invited into the next round as opposed to the first round?
Oh, well, I guess what I was, okay, I'll get to that. I think what I was thinking originally was that I think what this person might have been asking was that, some orchestras will have a pre-advancement to semis and then a different tier of people auto-advance to finals. I think they were wondering whether the way that the document is worded, are you only talking about having 25% representation in the semis of the pre-advancement, or are we talking about any part of the audition that has an auto advance?
I think our intention, on the subcommittee that wrote the guidelines, is just to make sure that you have at least 25% people of color wherever you decide to put them. And again, it goes back to the orchestra. They decide how they run it, but just to make sure that you have people there. And where you put them, first round, second round, third round. Now some people have 2 final rounds. So it's semantics to some degree.
Yeah. No, and then I guess I want to jump a sec because I see there's a question about why do orchestras auto advance, which I can't answer to, but I just know that from some of the conversations we had this summer, a point that someone made to me was that, yes, there's orchestras will auto advance, say if you've made the finals of a past orchestra, or if you're a section member of an ICSOM orchestra, then when you audition at a different place, there's rules about you getting to auto advance, sometimes to semis or finals, depending on, I guess, the CBA or whatever
yeah.
That. Now, someone pointed out to me though that is subjectivity, like that is actually a bias built into the system, that just because you have a position with X orchestra 100 miles that way, it's rational. Yes, it makes sense, but I guess the argument that I heard someone make to me once was that, well, if you already have a bias in the system, why not add go for cultural equity? Like why not have that be a factor as well if you're going to do that, since since obviously the process is already not completely objective, and we act like there's already.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that the solution to that is to make sure that you have that 25% or so of people of color that are in the system, they're in the audition. Why do orchestras advance? I mean, sometimes an advancement, I think rarely would you have a situation where somebody in the orchestra was advanced to the finals unless they were already in the orchestra. Like if you're a member of the section and you're auditioning to move up, then you might go directly into the finals, but they don't take people outside of the orchestra, I don't think, and put them.
I think you're right. I think what I've heard is that usually if you're coming from an outside orchestra, you might be auto placed to the semis, but
somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, depends. It's complicated.
I don't know, when our principal violist auditioned for the orchestra about a couple of years ago, she started from the first round because she didn't want to, she came from Toronto, she was principal there, and she didn't want to, she wanted the opportunity to keep playing, to play every round so that she could get her sea legs and do better. So I grant you that's the exception to the rule, but people feel differently about it, so.
Yeah, that's really good points. And I know some people have mentioned to us on some meetings and conferences that, showing up and being auto-advanced to a final round after the people that you're playing against and competing against have already played all day and are more warmed up, that could also be something to consider. But from a policy standpoint, I do wonder what, and this is another question sort of about inclusivity, about the recommended guidelines. How and why is not screening resumes an example of inclusivity?
Because I think that people feel prejudged by what's in their resume. I mean, you do have to have a certain amount of education and training, and it helps if you played an X orchestra beforehand. But I think that the culling of resumes is looking at the resume and saying, this person is not qualified to audition, or the name gives away their color, or I think that that's why, you don't want to screen. You want to give everybody a chance. If you can, if there's time.
Yeah, I think that's the key takeaway, just giving everybody a chance from the beginning, from the initial stage, everyone starting from the same place. And I wonder if I could, have Kibra chime in here. We're talking about, inclusivity and hiring processes, and because of how many institutions like AFM and collective bargaining agreements and red tape and things are involved in orchestras, I wonder from your perspective if there are other places that we could look at that have had similar struggles or similar challenges in having equity in a hiring process.
Sure. In Mellon's experience, it's largely been our fellowship programs in higher learning, and then also with curators largely. So creating fellowships for PhDs and to be able to have a pathway through for PhDs. And so that has been, what is tricky is that, and you end up skirting and running right up against, you try to skirt because you run up against, the law essentially, and making sure that you are prioritizing particular underrepresented groups, but not actually carving out spaces that are specifically designated to them, right? Because then that's discrimination. And so we've had more success, and the foundation has been doing that work longer in our higher learning programs. And so, I mean, it's constant evaluation and to understand and to assess, again, how much can you push the law without breaking the law to seek the goal that you're looking for, right? And I think that just needs to persist. You just need to keep working at that. I don't know if that's helpful. It's not I didn't have a slam dunk answer for you other than we're still doing it every single day.
No, I think that's what people need to hear that's the answer to the question, that it's we're doing it. This is, you want to know, let's just watch and stay tuned kind of, Absolutely. It's not the most fulfilling answer, but it's something that gives us, I don't know, I feel very hopeful about it. Here's another question. That's not the one I wanted to. I had something highlighted for Organizations that are following your guidelines, including screen auditions and no resume requirements, but are not finding success in hiring BIPOC applicants, do you have any additional recommendations for steps that can be taken? And that is something that I sort of mentioned at the beginning. NAAS is, sort of the first of its kind where we're sort of bringing everybody to the table and trying to be the focal point of the fulcrum where everything can balance and sort of have some shared equity around the industry. And so I think just having a relationship with NAAS and with Sphinx and with the New World Symphony and League of American Orchestras is a great way to partner yourself with institutions that are making this their primary objective. So sharing your goals with someone that is, their main focus point is to increase diversity in American orchestras. I have no doubt that you'll be in the storm of where we're heading. And like I said, there's a Sphinx job postings page, the NAAS musician database, and I'm a resource to reach out to musicians about any and all hiring and audition opportunities. And SOPA, of course, and that's something I mentioned at the beginning. If your orchestra would like to attend SOPA, you could reach out to me. We already have over 40 orchestras that are attending, and that's going to be, placement opportunities for musicians directly out of that. So I think that's what I would say to that. And there's a question. It says, Bill, NAAS seems to offer a great deal of support and opportunities for BIPOC instrumentalists. Does NAAS offer the same support to those pursuing conducting positions? If not, are there any resources that you can offer? And I'll say, yes, we do consider, conductors as musicians that qualify for NAAS grants. A conductor's audition might look a little different than a violist or cellist's audition, but all the same, we assess every single application and grant application individually. We don't have like a sort of one size fits all on what is approved and what's not, but we have awarded instrument grants and things like that to conductors in the past. Not as many as we have for cello and bass and things like that, but conductors are absolutely part of our roster. And we just have a few minutes left, right? I think we're supposed to end at 4:40. And so maybe I could just go around and ask a few, the few panelists here, just maybe a closing statement or closing remark about, are we on a hopeful footing? Is this something that we're launching off here with the guidelines, with SOPA, with NAAS as a whole? Is this leading us in the right direction? And what do you say to the orchestras that have not yet partnered with us or have not yet taken our support? Maybe I'll start with Meredith and then Kibra and Francesca.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we have created a vehicle for change here. And so, and I see that, that somebody had asked the question about the National Union adopting the NAAS guidelines. We were involved in creating it. So in essence, we have adopted it, but you can't make somebody do this. They have to come to the table. They have to be willing and they have to want to change. And this is a way to do it. So that's yeah, I mean, we've got, what do we have now? 98 orchestras that are on board to adopt this. So we're getting there.
I hold the similar type of optimism that Meredith has. I mean, I think the thing to hold on to, I think, while you're in the middle of the struggle, whether orchestras as well as musicians, and as well as, the NAAS team, is that should everybody really lean into it and put their shoulders into it, what it could do for the entire arts ecosystem is magnificent. And so, take the momentum, take the opportunity, have the difficult conversations with your funders, have the difficult conversations with, amongst yourselves, and really find a way through this, because whatever is on the other side of pandemic, we don't know, but we know it's definitely not going to be what it was before.
Yeah, and to add to Kibra's point, I mean, I think this question of, I think there are a lot of orchestras that maybe have, and arts organizations in general, that have this attitude of, well, we're great, that's enough. And I think what we've learned from 2020 is that that's not going to be enough of an excuse anymore to say, oh, well, we're just great. Doesn't matter that we're not relevant to our community or we're not relevant to the people that who we say that we represent. That's not going to be enough of an answer. And I think, it's interesting to look at the SOPA list, which is so robust, but there are definitely some orchestras that I'm aware are not listed there. And I I think if you as an orchestra are either hesitant to show up at Sphinx or hesitant to get involved with NAAS or SOPA or the mentorship, I think take this opportunity to ask yourselves why. Maybe like, why are you so hesitant to get involved? Because I think at this point, you should be excited to build a culture of inclusivity. You should be excited to try to transform to be a better, I don't know, just a better voice for your community. And I think if you're not excited about this opportunity, I think this is an opportunity for your organization to just really reflect on your core values.
Absolutely. And that's all the time we have. And thank you, Meredith, Kibra, and Francesca for joining me. And thank you, everybody, for attending. And like they all said, and we've been mentioning, please get involved and reach out. We'd love to have orchestras, managers, music directors, musicians, conductors, everybody is welcome. We're an inclusive environment, and, we believe in inclusivity and, most importantly, unity. And that's the theme of this weekend. So to that, go on to our next sessions and enjoy the rest of the weekend. Thank you again, everybody, for coming in, and thanks for speaking.